What's going on, guys? Running it back with part 2 of our Khorne roster breakdown. Moving on to the heroes. We talked about Lords last time. Tried to give you the best possible picture that I could for how they all worked, and I'll be doing the same here for the heroes. Another pretty strong category for Khorne. Really not too many weak options, so much as the options can sometimes be pretty pricey. Khorne doesn't have a ton of generic heroes. We'll do them first, and then we'll get into the legendary heroes, who are pretty pricey, but do offer quite a bit of flexibility and good opportunity cost, especially if you can catch your opponent with the kind of builds that the legendary heroes tend to do pretty well against, which I'll get into. So, without further ado, we'll kick it off, and we'll get into the Blood Reaper first. Very strong generic hero option with some very powerful combat skills. Very much not a slouch when it comes to beating up on enemy heroes and characters, as well as being pretty good against infantry. We'll swap over and let me pull them up. Little unprepared on that front, but whatever. Just to get into the actual stats, we've got 4,000 HP on this guy, which is pretty middle of the road when it comes to foot characters. Nothing too special there. 40 armor and 65 leadership are both pretty low. 40 armor especially is quite weak, but these guys are demons, so they do get some physical resistance as long as they're kept away from really high damage anti-infantry melee units and magical damage. They're usually in a pretty good spot in terms of their effectiveness in combat. And they do have a very powerful heal in the Bloody Shackle, which is pretty much a must-have if you bring either one or two of these guys. It gives them a ton of extra HP to work with, basically giving them 5,800 HP. Because this is a 48% heal, which is quite a bit. I mean, that is substantial for any character. Makes them quite difficult to peel through now. They used to be quite weak. They would have been much lower on the tier list prior to the rework, where the DLC came in and they got these extra items, which have really improved them overall. They were basically dog water characters before. Now they're quite strong. 46 speed is decent. They can get around the battlefield pretty quickly on foot. 60 melee attack means they hit pretty damn hard. I mean, they have very competitive melee stats compared to a lot of other infantry characters. With their good AP weapon strength, they can definitely get through quite a few characters that are of a much higher caliber than them and acquit themselves pretty well. It's a pretty cost-effective trade if you've got, like, Blood Reapers smacking in against a dragon. They can actually do some serious damage to some of those larger characters if they get dove on top of. 35 melee defense is pretty low. They do take significant damage, but that's where the heal comes in. Weapon strength, like I said, a majority AP, 260 armor-piercing damage, 20 bonus versus infantry. Obviously very good against other foot characters, especially Dowie hero squads. These guys are amazing against those now. They beat the absolute brakes off of Dragon Slayers, and they can do pretty well against Grombrindle and Felix and like a Thane or something. They're pretty nice to have in the Dowie matchup, Nurgle matchup. Wood Elves to some extent. Wood Elves they're a little vulnerable against just because lots of anti-infantry units available for the Wood Elves who can do some pretty good damage against these guys. But even there, they're good against Dryads, they're good against War Dancers and Eternal Guard especially. They're also pretty decent against the Waystalkers. Really, the choice that it comes down to when considering whether you're going to be bringing the Blood Reapers or not is just, you know, do you need to anchor an objective, and do you have a little bit of, like, a mobile option in the Lord category? The answer to whether you have a mobile Lord or not for Khorne is usually going to be yes. Skull Taker, Valkia, Arbol, Bloodthirster, Blood Speaker if you are, playing with this guy on the horse. And, for 850, it's really not a bad price to pay for a very powerful foot-based duelist type of character. You can send them into lots of chaff infantry where they can just grind away and then charge up Hellblade, giving them more weapon strength. And if enemy, like I said, if any more powerful enemy characters are trying to dive bomb these guys, being demonic, they're not going to get terrified or anything. They cause fear in their own right, and also have the 60 melee attack to fight back with. And as long as they're together, they can do pretty well against dragon-type characters. The weakness of the Blood Reapers is, again, their low armor, lack of shield. They can get shot down, not fairly easily, though, because they are a very small and slender model. And with the decent speed, they're pretty maneuverable. You can dodge around with these guys and avoid missile fire, actually. Yeah, I mean, there's really not much else to say about them. They're okay on the Juggernaut. Usually I only bring these guys on the Jugger if I'm going with a Blood Speaker, just so that they can run around with the Blood Speaker and kind of help him out. Blood Speaker not a good combatant at all, so he is very vulnerable to getting attacked by much more powerful characters, and the Blood Reapers on the Juggernauts have 70 speed, so they can keep pace with this Blood Speaker, and definitely beat up on anybody who might be coming after him. You can also bring Locus of Abjuration on one of these guys, if you've got the Blood Speaker. That way you can bring Blood Sacrifice, and then you can also get the heals. You can heal up, you know, some of the more elite units like Skull Crushers or Wrathmongers or something. It basically mitigates all the damage that Blood Sacrifice does to the Blood Speaker if you use Locus of Abjuration alongside it. Just to talk about a couple other matchups that I like these guys in, probably the most underrated one is against the Dark Elves. I have seen these guys put in a lot of work against Dark Elves. They're very good against the Dread Spear and Bleak Sword Chaff. They're pretty good against Black Ark Corsairs. The only thing that they really don't want to fight infantry-wise for the Dark Elves is Witch Elves. And maybe Hargoneth Executioners, but you don't see Hargoneth Executioners ever, hardly. They're a little lackluster as a unit, but if your opponent brings, like, Blackguard of Nagorond, you can also really chew on those guys, and I've seen Dark Elf players bring one or two of those before in the matchups I've had against them. They're very good against those guys. Another thing that they do very well against the Dark Elves, we'll flip over to them, is shut down Bloodrack Medusas. Bloodrack Medusas are pretty good fighters, but they are mostly geared for fighting large targets, so Foot Reapers are really good at chasing these guys down. The 58 speed on the Medusa does mean that they can stay in front of the Blood Reapers pretty easily, but if you've got this thing running away from your Foot Reaper character squad, then that basically means that it's not shooting and getting any value, really, and that's honestly perfect. These guys, your opponent's going to be trying to keep them from catching up to the Medusa, where they'll chew through the pretty low melee defense of the Blood Rack. Blood Racks only have 40 melee defense, and with 60 melee attack, these guys are going to be hitting pretty often. They can do some big damage there. I really like them in that particular matchup, and that's one that you really wouldn't imagine them to be nearly as impactful in. The reason for that is I think that the cultists against Dark Elves are fine. They're a little vulnerable to, like, Malekith or something, where the Blood Reapers can actually fight back. Cultists, with their lack of AP, actually struggle pretty badly, and oftentimes the missiles you're running into are not going to be things that the Bloodletter Summon can shut down. So I think that the Dark Elves are pretty good at mitigating the effectiveness of the most powerful ability that the Cultists have, and the Blood Reapers are just a little bit easier to use. Plus, you know, your opponent trying to shut these guys down is going to involve, like, throwing cavalry into them, and even if these guys are fighting Cold One Knights, they can do some serious damage to Cold One Knights. It's pretty awesome. Dark Riders lose to these guys pretty hard as well, and just don't do a lot of damage to them, period. They're a very annoying unit for the Dark Elves to have to deal with. So, one last note, before I forget about it, we might as well talk about the other abilities. Locus of Abjuration, like I said, really only good with the Blood Sacrifice on the Blood Speaker. The mounts, Juggernauts are okay for these guys. They're a little pricey at that point. I much prefer them on foot. Blood Thrones, I wouldn't really even bother with. Your Lords on the throne are much stronger, and multiple Blood Thrones are fine. They just don't do a ton for you. The problem with the Blood Thrones is that it doesn't give them any extra leadership, and really terrible melee attack and melee defense means they get they get a lot of damage inflicted to them as they're running around. They can really suffer for their efforts. I think you should just leave them on foot, where they can be a lot more cost effective with just the bare minimum. Eternal Blade is a very powerful item, and I've had a lot of success with bringing it against Nurgle. Two of the Blood Reapers on foot with Eternal Blade and the Bloody Shackle can actually put some serious damage into lords as powerful as Kugath, which is really impressive. And that's one of the few ways that you can counter Kugath, is by not, like, committing anything that the Mortis Engine's going to do a bunch of damage to. And the Blood Reapers, very strong at ripping into him. They do some serious work with the 50% weapon strength and 40 extra melee attack. You know, buffing all that up, all that weapon strength up 50%, gets them to, you know, the mid-500s, and if you have Hellblade up, talking about like 600 something weapon strength on a 1,000 gold unit, which is pretty bananas, honestly. Really like them for that. It's another niche that they can fill, but you gotta be careful with these guys. You don't want to over-rely on them. I like them as just a mix-up for builds, and I find that the more you can keep your opponent guessing with what you're going to bring as Khorne, the better you can do in general. Getting all the new DLC stuff was so nice. It's made so many more builds viable than they used to be. Used to see some very samey builds from Khorne in the past. It was usually like Valkia, Double Cultist, you know, adding in a Skull Cannon or two after their buffs. I liked them before the buffs, but now the Skull Cannons are much better. You know, people really love to bring them. You'd see, you know, lots of Minos, obviously, but now the roster as a whole has a little bit more versatility and flexibility, so Blood Reapers have really benefited from the changes and everything, and it's really nice to be able to bring something that is a little bit off meta, so to speak, and it do very well for you. Alright guys, moving on to talk about the Cultist a little bit here. Cultists, very strong heroes. I do think that they're pretty equivalent to the Blood Reapers in terms of their effectiveness. They fill a very different role, though. Blood Reapers are more combat-oriented, obviously, with some strong items that can keep them healed up for a good portion of the battle, give them more opportunities to value trade against stuff. And Cultists are a little bit more oriented towards countering enemy missile play and providing a little bit of battlefield utility with their summons, which is probably the strongest thing that they've got. We'll flip it over now. We can start really getting into the nitty-gritty of the Cultists here. They've got a similar HP pool, 4,000 HP, which is 20 more than the Blood Reaper. But, you know, Blood Reapers have the Bloody Shackle, of course. These Cultists don't have any access to healing, which can be a little bit unfortunate for them at times. If your opponent commits big dragons into trying to fight the Cultists, that is one way that these guys can get burst down pretty badly. You need to be very careful and aware of that if you're going up against factions that have access to the dragon type SCs. Definitely want to preserve these guys as long as possible so they can actually get engaged in melee, grind up the ability to use this Bloodletter summon, which is their selling point. Bloodletter Summon is incredibly strong. You can use it into the rear of mainline engagements to break open the front line. You can use it to chase down missile units and kill them. You can do a lot of things with the Bloodletter Summons. Just extra weight of power into like a blob fight as well is honestly not a bad way to get value out of this Bloodletter Summon. One of the better of the Mono God Cultist summons, honestly. The Slaaneshi Cultists may have a little bit of a claim on having the better option just because the Demonettes have Devastating Flanker, which can do some really disgusting damage, but I do think that this is a pretty good tool to have. It is the reason that Cultists were the meta for a very long time. You'd see double Cultists with just the summons. And they would run in, grind on infantry for a little bit, and then pop the summon to finish off what they were fighting, or to go after the enemy missile line, just to weaken it before the rest of the front line engagement resolved in your favor. Other selling points of these guys: silver shields, 55% of all small arms is not going to be hurting these guys. They also have 15 missile resist, making them very resilient to missile fire. Decent armor value at 75, not good, not great. Leadership is pretty mediocre for the quality of character. It'd be nice if they had a little bit more, but, you know, it is what it is. They'll hold in and do pretty decently as long as their frenzy is active. That does keep them from fleeing from any combats because of fear and terror. Once it wears off, though, they can be a little vulnerable to the terror routes and also just routing because of the fear malice, which can be a little unfortunate, but usually they're going to be okay. 44 foot speed makes them quite quick on the ground, just like the Blood Reaper. They can also hound down a lot of annoying units and keep them on the move. They just don't hit quite as hard, which is a little unfortunate, but they are pretty damn powerful in combat. They can definitely chip down a broad selection of enemy lord types, especially foot characters. Like, I used to have a lot of success bringing these guys against Vampire Coast, because they can get after the Fleet Admirals, and even Noctilus. Count Noctilus can get bullied by these guys pretty badly. I do think the Blood Reapers fill the pure combat role a little bit better, but just having that summon on the field can do wonders for you. It can really provide you quite a bit of value that the Blood Reapers might not be able to do as consistently. I think the Blood Reapers have a little bit higher cap on the amount of cost effectiveness that they can ultimately provide, but I think the Cultists might be a little bit more consistent. It's very rare that they don't get their value back in some regard. And you do need to include the value that the Bloodletter Summon gets you, because it is baked into the character, so I think it's appropriate that that's taken into account as well for considering their cost efficiency. Other items, Icon of Endless War and Sword of Anti-Heroes. Sword of Anti-Heroes is a very powerful buff item, 50% weapon strength, which is, you know, an effect that a lot of Khornate characters have access to. Lasts for 40 seconds, 90-second cooldown. You can use it pretty often. Does make them extra fighty. Don't think it's all that great, though. It's just 150 gold, and you want your cultists to be as cheap and durable as possible, but the Icon of Endless War does help them out in that regard in a way that I think incentivizes you to bring it in certain matchups, like against Wood Elves, where there are a lot of missiles, and having these guys available on the field as long as possible is really nice. Gives them the extra leadership and reduces their vigor, so they have perfect vigor, making them extra swarmy. They can just stay in combat all game, basically, with Icon of Endless War available, because they're not suffering any of the debuffs. Their combat efficiency is at, like, max value at all times. It's really nice. Very underrated item. You know, you just want to mix it in there every now and then if you think that you need your cultists to be doing a little bit extra than they normally will with just the Bloodletter Summon available to them. Steed and War Shrine honestly aren't really worth it. The Chaos Steed gives them a little extra armor and obviously the speed. 400 more health, but it's not that great. I don't really ever bring these guys on the Chaos Steeds. It reduces the shield that they have to the bronze. I think that them being on foot is the real appeal. That's really the power of the generic Khorne characters in a nutshell, is whether they're good on foot or not. And speaking of that, we will flop over and we'll talk about the other generic hero character that Khorne has access to. The Exalted Hero leaves a lot to be desired. Isn't bad, but honestly is very overshadowed by the other options. Especially when you're considering cost. An Exalted Hero with the Potion of Toughness, let me flop over real quick so you can see. With the Potion of Toughness, it gives a 16% heal, give or take, which is pretty nice. Gives extra armor and melee defense also. But it's hard to use and hard to make use of these guys, considering the same price as a cultist with a much stronger ability in the summon. Because these guys only have 33 foot speed. They cannot catch anything, even other foot characters. They're so slow and ponderous. They do hit really damn hard, but mostly only against light armor, because their AP value is actually less than the Cultist. You can see here, Cultist has 35 more AP damage, which you might not think is a lot, but honestly can really make a big difference. These guys are really attuned to beating up on low armor characters, which meant that their only real niche, outside of coming in on their mounts, was against the Dowie. Dowie for a while were doing double Dragon Slayer all the time, and these Exalted Heroes were pretty good against the Dragon Slayers. Just because those Dowie characters don't have any armor, so these guys just absolutely wallop them. They've got 60 melee attack with Frenzy and Rage, so they can get really sauced up. And that usually mitigates any of the effects of exhaustion that they might be experiencing over the course of a battle. Decent charge bonus on them, tons of armor but no shield. A little bit better leadership than the other choices. The extra 5 is pretty nice, but it's just the speed lets them down. And if you start talking about bringing them on a mount, they start getting pretty expensive. Chaos Steed really doesn't have much to offer them anyways, in my opinion. Really the only thing I've found the Exalted Heroes to do well with is a Juggernaut mount. Now that the Juggernaut's been buffed up, gotten a little extra speed, these guys can definitely move around and present another very powerful combat character that can go in and fight just about anything. They've got okay melee defense. The AP split is very nice on the Juggernaut mount. 355 armor piercing weapon strength is damn strong. 70 charge bonus, 63 melee attack with the flaming attacks, which they do of course have on foot, but on the Juggernaut with all of that weapon strength hitting, they are going to be slapping through stuff, especially units with regen. These guys can do really nicely against, but they do, again, I find, suffer when it comes to comparing them to, like, the Blood Reaper, because for only 400 gold more, you can bring 2 Blood Reapers on foot who are going to be a little bit harder to kill overall, just because of the Bloody Shackle, and also hit very hard with the flaming and also magical attacks, which can get around a lot of units who rely on physical resistance, whereas this guy doesn't have magical damage in any regard. Just a little annoying. But it is what it is. Not a bad character, but one that doesn't really have a lot of shine on the Khorne roster, just because is a little too redundant, in my opinion. Probably could do better with the Exalted Heroes of Khorne in Warriors of Chaos build, where you can bring a character that can, like, heal them up, and then they can really perform some serious damage riding around on those Juggernauts. Not a whole lot else to say about them. Just generally lacking kind of combat character. Doesn't do much outside of fighting, which, you know, you've got plenty of fighty stuff on Khorne, and the battlefield control is usually the way to go, or just sheer cost effectiveness, which leaves this guy in the dust a little bit. But a Juggernaut variant can definitely help out in some matchups. Warriors of Chaos, they can do pretty nicely in riding around with the Jugger. If your opponent brings Festus or something like that, Village, the Exalted Hero of Khorne, is very good at killing those types of characters. It's like one of the few areas where I think can actually shine. So, moving on, we'll get into the legendary heroes now, who are very nice, very strong tools for the roster. Karanak being first and foremost among them, I think. The goodest of boys, very good anti-Lord and Hero option. Prey of the Blood God being one of the abilities that really helps that out. But before we get into talking about it, I'll just go over the stats a little bit. 4,800 HP is pretty decent. Not the biggest HP pool, but a very maneuverable unit, so you should be able to dodge and weave enough to avoid the worst of any damage that might be coming Karanak's way. Lots of spell resistance, missile resist, and physical resist also makes Karanak surprisingly tanky. Combat really, like melee combat really can be the only area where Karanak can struggle, and that's usually only against stuff that's got magic attacks in their own right and are able to, like, box Karanak in and really just, like, whoop on them. Gotta be careful of that, but again, that's where the 95 speed comes in. 50 armor really isn't all that good, but is a little bit, and is able to mitigate some of the damage. Leadership at 80 is really solid, comparable to a lot of the Khorne Lords, which is excellent. Really love to see high leadership on the Khornate units, especially the demons, who do crumble out. Demonic instability is so punishing, as I'm sure many people are aware of. Good melee attack at 55 with access to Frenzy, getting him up to 65. Melee attack, 45 is, you know, pretty middle of the road. Not good, not great. Weapon strength, 200 AP damage, 380 base weapon damage. There's a lot to be left on the table against heavily armored characters, but you do have good control options and can synergize very well with lords who do actually have AP that can really hammer home against your targets. Charge bonus of 50 does hit pretty hard. Karanak's very decent in melee combat. Good against a lot of different types of units. Obviously going to be gunning after Lords and Heroes just because of the items and the abilities that he's got. But even against, like, a Skirmish Cav, Khorne can provide a little bit of assistance, very quick and able to get after those types of units. Do some serious damage to them is honestly pretty great. Definitely helps out on the flanks. And gives you the versatility to dive in after your opponent's Lords and Heroes, given the opportunity and time. So, getting into the abilities, Prey of the Blood God is probably the best ability that Karanak has access to. Just being able to lock down an enemy hero or lord for the 22 seconds gives you the chance to dive on top of them and do some serious work against them. Usually, you'll see Valkia and Karanak together, but I think an underrated combo is Karanak and the Exalted Bloodthirster. Bloodthirster with Deathbringer gets up to 870 weapon strength, and with the Prey of the Blood God doing a little damage and Karanak contributing his own attacks, you can really rip through an enemy caster or lord pretty quickly, and Brass Collar of Vengeance silencing and negating magical weapons can help all that out tremendously. The silence alone would be a good selling point, but negating the magical attacks is also pretty damn strong for Khorne. It helps the Bloodthirster and Karanak out immensely. Karanak especially, obviously, because it's always active on stuff around him. Meaning he's always got 20% physical resistance. Also doesn't have any condition of going offline. like the Wood Elf Treemen have a similar negates magical weapons within effect area, but that is contingent upon them staying above 50% HP. This is just always active in a pretty large radius, and is very punishing. Karanak is best used against heal blobs and against stuff like Slanesh and the Undead, where the magic is incredibly powerful and can punish Khorne very hard if it's not shut down. Karanak does a good job of giving you the opportunity to be able to counter those very annoying casters, because oftentimes people are going to be very cagey with their lords against the Blood God, just because it's very difficult to duel the Khornate lords. Usually they're going to be trying to kite you away and deny you value through that, and Karanak can shut that down completely. So if you think your opponent's going to go for a kite build, Karanak is an excellent counter to that, and can definitely win you a game in the early going even. Being able to snipe out a lord, and then running around and helping out in the frontline fights, lowering melee defense on units, and imbuing less vigor on them is awesome. Karanak's Howl is another ability you can bring that can do some pretty good work. It is adding a lot of cost onto him once you start including all of these. The best thing you can do is pray the Blood God and Brass Collar of Bloody Vengeance, but if you do think you're going to need the Karanak's Howl, it's worth having. It's a Fleshhound summon, and Fleshhounds are pretty strong. They have pretty good mass on them too, so you can pull off a little bit of a combo where you use Pray the Blood God, lock a lord down in place, and then pop the Howl, and then surround them with the Fleshhounds, and it can be pretty hard for that lord to break out of the encirclement there. You could really get some huge damage, especially effective against horse lords. Like Archeon, Tyrion, units like that usually don't have enough mass to push through a bunch of Fleshhounds. With Karanak and a Bloodthirster beating on them, you can win a fight against a lord like that outright pretty quickly, with a good surround from these summoned Fleshhounds. It does cost 200 gold, though. Take that into account when you're deciding whether you're going to bring it or not. I do think it is worth it in some matchups, and even if you aren't locking a lord in place, just having a Fleshhound that you can throw away to like chase enemy skirmish cav around is pretty awesome, because they'll either end up using a ton of ammo against these things, or just be like run off into the Shadow Realm, while the rest of your units are able to value trade in the front line without a whole bunch of missile fire hitting them. Last ability, other than we'll talk about Endless Hunter first, actually. Endless Hunter reveals units in a 55-meter radius, permanently reveals that unit, removes Hide in Forest, Stalk, and Unspottable, which is really good against Skaven, Greenskins, Wood Elves. Lots of factions really hate having their hidden units revealed. And Karanak can be a really nice little scout piece. I mean, even without any of the stuff of other items and abilities added onto him, 1100 with just Endless Hunter really isn't all that bad. Can definitely be pretty good if you think your opponent's going to be going for a very stealth-heavy build against you. You don't see that too often, but for revealing like a Natty Bubo sharpshooter so that you can then see where they're trying to move around the battlefield at all times, it can be really good. Also revealing Waystalkers and stuff like that is awesome in its own right. So, worth remembering that this is available and to try and get use out of it in the applicable matchups, of course. Last ability that I'll talk about, Talon of the Skull Throne. 50% weapon strength and 40 melee attack, increases with enemy units wavering or routing. It's fine. It's giving you a nice boost to the damage potential, but I don't know. I don't find it to be all that great. Karanak's already a decent enough combatant that the extra melee attack and weapon strength isn't all that useful. You're better off bringing him as cheaply as possible so that he can actually just get around and do what he's really best at, which is locking down the lords and also silencing stuff. Just increasing his pure combat ability isn't all that necessary for him, I think. Against most other targets, he's going to be doing just fine anyways with his good stats. So, that's really all I have to say about Khorne. Obviously a very strong choice, worth bringing in a lot of matchups, and I really like him up here in the A tier, which is a good position for him to sit in. Scylla is going to go up in the A tier as well. I have come around on Scylla in a big way, very skeptical of this Monkey Man when the DLC first came out, but have really swung around on him. We'll flip over real quick, just so you can see what I'm talking about. The big selling point is the Unbreakable on Scylla. I mean, having to get through all 7,270 HP on this guy is actually shockingly difficult. That's a pretty solid HP pull, even without any heals. I do think Scylla synergizes best with the Warriors of Chaos, where they have a little bit more access to healing, so that this guy can just continue rampaging around the battlefield and in turn using Kill for Khorne and even Serpentine Tail. But on the Khorne roster, bare bones with no heals and just doing it all himself is still very powerful and has gotten me a ton of value in a lot of the games I've used him in. I haven't really been disappointed in the performance in any of the matchups I've used Scylla in, and I've used him in just about every matchup at least once. The factions he's weakest against are like Vampire Coast and High Elves. He can struggle against a little bit. High Elves just have so many spears that can get around his terrible melee defense and low armor. I think those are a little risky, but most other factions he seems to do really nicely against. Chaos Dowie and Warriors of Chaos, as well as Dark Elves. Dark Elves are a pretty good matchup for Scylla to go into. Probably the ones he shines the most in. Just provides very strong stats overall and good combat potential with some good rampage opportunities. Can really help to swing you a lot of fights, and even if you just have Scylla bare bones with none of the items and abilities, still represents a pretty disruptive tool if you just keep him moving and rampaging through enemy units. Decent mass at 1800, the 7200 HP is nice, low armor and melee defense like I said, but good melee attack. It's always going to be 62, since he is unbreakable. Frenzy is always active, which means obviously he cannot be broken by terror routes or anything. Speed at 65 is pretty decent, not as quick as the Juggernaut characters or Khorne, but still speedy enough to be able to catch a lot of different types of units. 285 armor-piercing weapon strength is pretty strong. It's almost as good as Valkia. Valkia only has 15 more armor-piercing weapon damage, so you're talking about a unit that hits as hard as her, and is in a similar price point if you're bringing the two best items, or the best item and the best ability for Scylla. Just another very cost-effective SD out on the field can really mess with your opponent. I think Scylla is a nice mix-up tool. Also does really well into Tomb Kings, another matchup where I neglected to mention how well he can perform. Very good at running after Cetra and beating up on him, and can hold his own against like the Sphinx of Uskef, and do some pretty good damage against Sepulchral Stalkers, Chosen of the Gods, even Acropolis Knights and stuff like that. Ushabti, melee Shabti in the front line. Love the versatility of Scylla. We'll get into the abilities now, just so I don't go over this too much. 25% missile resist is the last thing to note in terms of the like passive resistances and stuff. That's worth mentioning. It does make him a little tough to snipe, and you can stack that with the brass collar increases to damage resistance and spell resist to make a very tanky unit. You know, maxes out at 100 kills, which is pretty easy to get with Scylla if you're cycle charging and also using Kill for Khorne correctly. So, abilities-wise, we've got a very expensive ability set here. I mean, you can cut all of them and get 800 gold off of Scylla, which is, you know, the price of a whole bloodletter, which is pretty interesting to note. And you definitely can mess around with these. They're all pretty decent except for Crimson Juggernaut, which I really don't like. It would be nice if this were like a passive ability, honestly. Don't think a 25-second increase to charge bonus, speed, and charge speed is really all that good. Yeah, Glorious Charge is good and all, but I don't know. Not really that great for what it does. Serpentine Tail is the first one we can get into in depth. Does a little bit of mortis damage in a radius around Scylla of 10 meters, which is pretty small. This is good against cavalry and really bunched up low model count infantry like Depth Guard or Eshin Triads or stuff like that. Neither of which Scylla really wants to fight, though. So I don't think it's all that great, ultimately. I think it's better if you're going with Warriors of Chaos and you're bringing Festus and Scylla together, which I have done. You can double up on Mortis Engine effects with Scylla and Festus providing both. You can absolutely just flatten enemy units doing that. As well as you can have Serpentine Tail and just have Festus healing them the entire game, which is also a pretty good option. And Scylla's pretty good at helping Festus. You know, Festus can sometimes struggle because he gets jumped on top of by combat characters and can get manhandled that way. But Scylla can buffer those off, provide some pushback, and soak up a bunch of damage and then get healed up and do really nicely there. Kill for Khorne, I think, is a must-have ability. Having a Rampage, it's the same duration as Rage Embodied, and Scylla costs literally less than half of a Scarbrand pick. Even if you cut Scarbrand and only bring Rage Embodied, he's still 2650 as opposed to 1500 if you just bring Kill for Khorne on Scylla. Very cost effective, very, very nice, and the Rampage is really strong, and then the Explosion is actually quite powerful. It's the same as R-Balls, well, a little less good than R-Balls. 24 damage as opposed to 36, 66% AP damage, but that's still pretty good against infantry. That's going to provide some pretty good value, also pretty good against cavalry, where the radius on this allows for you to hit most of an enemy unit if they're blobbed up on Scylla here. And the Rampage, obviously, it disrupts the unit. You can try and pull back and like drag them deeper into your lines, and it can be really, really sick. And if you can also Rampage SEs with this, doesn't do any damage to them really, obviously. But being able to lock them down on the ground for another 15 seconds is really awesome. And, I don't know, really not much else to say about it. It's just a good ability and is an auto-include, no matter what you're bringing Scylla for, in my opinion. Crimson Juggernaut sucks, don't bring it. Brass Collar is worth considering at least. The 20% damage resistance and extra spell res makes Scylla even more difficult to kill. Being unbreakable, you're always going to have the benefit of having extra HP functionally when this is active at full effect. I think it's worth bringing more often than not, honestly. The 20% damage resistance will stack on top of the missile resist, which means Scylla is going to be much harder to shoot down, which is one of the big weaknesses of Scylla, as well as getting trapped in Spearmen, obviously. But you know, you do have Kill for Khorne to bail you out of that situation in a pinch if you really need to. This does knock infantry models back, and then Scylla just runs away. It's pretty good. Pretty good. Brass Collar just makes him that much tankier and gives him that much more time to get value out of the other abilities he's got access to. So, really like the monkey. Really come around on him. Thought he was the weakest option of all the characters for a little while, but then when I actually started using him, quickly changed my mind on that and think he's one of the stronger options available to you. Moving on to our last hero here, we do have Scar Bloodwrath, who is okay. Really not bad. Is basically an Exalted hero, but better in every possible way. We'll get in here. I'll flop the view over so that y'all can see what I'm talking about. Get rid of Silo there. Talked about you enough, buddy. So, Scar is pretty cheap. You can bring him absolutely bare bones, and he's 1400 and will do pretty well for you without any of the abilities. I do think Scaremore's Butchers is pretty nice to have in general. But Scar's big selling point is the 5600 HP, 80 armor, 80 leadership, 46 foot speed, which is pretty quick. Same as the Blood Reapers, so in the same vein, very good at getting after stuff like Medusas or just whatever, and being a big scary unit that your opponent really doesn't want to have to engage, but is decently fast enough and probably going to be able to find fights if you're just microing him around and keeping him on objectives to like anchor them. People are going to have to waddle up and lock horns with him at some point, and then he can really start to shine in melee combat. 60 melee attack, has frenzy, so it's usually going to be up to 70. 48 melee defense. It's honestly pretty good. I mean, you can see there's a lot of lords that don't even have the 48 melee defense that Scar here does. But it is pretty middle of the road at the end of the day. He does get beat up by units like Tyrion and really good combat characters, but he can give it in return. He's got a Sunder Armor effect and magical attacks with great weapon strength. He's got better weapon strength than Valkia. Almost as good AP values as the Exalted Bloodthirster. 60 off of the AP weapon strength that an Exalted Bloodthirster has, so that's pretty fat. And 20 bonus versus infantry, which is the same as the Blood Reaper here, as well as Skull Taker, who I think also has 20. Yeah. So anytime you need to bring like an anti-infantry duelist and you're not already bringing Skull Taker or something, Scar Bloodwrath is going to be the guy for you. Also has Blood Tally and Bloodborne. The Blood Tally did get changed, so it's always keeping its charge as he gets kills. 150 is the maximum intensity, and it increases the healing modifier up to 50%, which is a really fat heal for Scar. A 30% heal on Scar gives him how much HP again? I need to do the math again real quick. It's up in the low 7,000s if I'm not totally off on this calculation. Yeah, so 7,200 HP, which is quite a bit, and it can be really nice to get that procced, and he just keeps fighting and providing value, giving Scaremore's Butchers to everything around him in a 35-meter radius, which is a Sunder Armor imbuement and a weapon strength buff. Very small weapon strength buff, but every little bit helps, and the Sunder Armor is the real selling point of that. It is a great effect and can really mess your opponents up. Other abilities and items for him. Inevitable Horror I've yet to mess around with much. Scar's probably the unit I've used the least. I've done mostly just isolated tests with him, not really bringing him in a lot of matchups and trying him out in-game so much. I've played a few matches with him and been pretty satisfied with him to talk about his capabilities. Just need to make sure that he's staying on a point where he can just maneuver around on it and get into the fights with units that are trying to move up and cap those objectives. But Inevitable Horror might be good against stuff like Greenskin, Skaven, and other low leadership factions where the -8 leadership can be pretty punishing. And again, him being on foot, being a reasonably small target, and just having this good of stats means that he can probably wade into like, just racky front lines, just absolutely smack them around, get tons of charge on blood tally, and be popping Inevitable Horror every chance you get, because it's a 35-meter effect radius, 33-second duration. It lowers the leadership by 8, as I already mentioned, but also raises the vigor on the enemy units, tiring them out. Vigor is a very underrated element of the game. Lowers stats by quite a lot once units get exhausted, and being able to tire stuff out easily with abilities is pretty nice. It's a little niche, but isn't terrible. Just the issue with Inevitable Horror, it is 200 gold. The -8 leadership is nice, but Khorne doesn't really play into the leadership bombing as much as other factions do, like Slaanesh does. There's not a lot of cheap available terror either, so lowering that leadership is really only going to pay off if the unit's already got pretty poor leadership to begin with. So I think it might be a little niche, but I'll play around with it and I'll report back at some point. Maybe do a separate video to talk about Scar a little bit more and see if this item is really worth it. But my instinct says no. Scaremore's Butcher is probably going to be the best option that you're going to be bringing most of the time, if you even bring it at all. Last thing for Scar is the Bloodstorm Blades, which is a big buff to the weapon strength. I mean, 75% on both forms of damage is pretty insane. He is going to absolutely slay everything in his path. This is a very good item against the Dowie, where Scar basically becomes a murder machine. I think that is Scar's best matchup. I do think there are a handful of others where he probably shines, but I have used him in games against Dowie, and he has absolutely butchered enemy lords. It is amazing. He's so strong against the Dowie. Bonus versus infantry imbuement on him, as well as that huge increase to the weapon damage, just means that even units like Grombrindle and Ungrim, who are incredible duelists in their own right, and would duel Scar pretty well under normal circumstances, just get absolutely smacked around by him. Long duration on it of 35 seconds. It's just, I mean, it's Deathbringer, but better. And Deathbringer, like I said in my Lords video, is one of the best weapon strength buffs in the game, so we're talking about a pretty insane increase to the combat potential of an already really strong duelist-type character. Not a whole lot left to say about Scar, honestly. It's just the things that let him down are the foot speed. Against quick factions, just leave him at home. But if you're going to be in a knockdown, drag-out brawl, he is a pretty good character to have along for it. Definitely helps you out a lot. Not sure what Lord he would synergize best with. Honestly, probably Skulltaker or maybe a Bloodspeaker. You know, you leave a Scar up on the front line to do the front line holding, while the Bloodspeaker runs around in the back lines. Maybe you can pair up Inevitable Horror with the Murderous Exhortations leadership debuff, and then you have a real leadership bombing blob going on with Gruesome Display added into the mix. That would be -20 leadership, which is pretty crazy. Definitely probably able to scare some units off the battlefield there and then with those all stacked together. And then they believe there's also plenty of Khorne units that cause fear. Yeah, like Fleshhounds, that's another -8 leadership on units that don't have immune to psychology. You can maybe do some synergizing with that. It'd be a little hard. Again, I'll play around with Scar some more and report back to y'all if I find Inevitable Horror to be a very good ability or not. So far, haven't been all that impressed by it. Yeah. That's going to be it for this one, guys. We'll flip back over and we'll just take one last little look-see over the tier list. Last quick little rundown. None of the heroes are necessities. I would have said cultist in the past, but Khorne has gotten a lot of new units, lots of useful tools, and I think that just thinking of the heroes as X factors for your either combat potential with like Scylla and the Blood Reaper, or battlefield control with Karanak and the cultists, is the best way to go about it. Scar is a nice mix-up and really good against the Dowie and maybe a handful of other factions, but is held back a little bit just by being footbound and a little bit slow, despite having good foot speed. Exalted Hero, very mediocre on this roster, doesn't provide anything that other heroes don't already do better. Can be left at home 9 times out of 10, but you can bring him on the Juggernaut and maybe have a good performance with him and brag about it a little. But yeah, any of the A-tier stuff you can bring in most matchups. Just depends on what you want to do. Karanak for Lord Sniping, Blood Reapers on foot for the healing, and Goon Squad efforts, just running around and being nuisances that your opponent is trying to kill, but alternately trying to avoid as much as possible, not really knowing what to do against them. Cultists for the shields and the summon against gun lines. Scylla just to be disruptive as hell in most matchups in the game. You know, be careful against like Empire or High Elves, like I mentioned, where there's lots of cheap spears and cheap non-AP forms of missile damage that can get through that low armor this guy has, or the low melee defense. It's always a give and take in this game, but these guys give more than they take more often than not, so I do like them. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this one. I'll be running it back next time with the infantry, which are going to be the next section that I'm going to talk about, and I'll be working on that and getting it to you ASAP. Until then, take care, guys, and peace out.